10 of history's most evil medical murderers. Hey Creepshow fam, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the darkest corners of history, where the people we trust with our health and lives turn into horrifying monsters. We're counting down 10 of history's most evil medical murderers, cases where doctors and medical professionals used their knowledge and positions not to heal, but to harm. These twisted individuals took advantage of the vulnerable, causing unspeakable pain and death under the guise of care. So grab your blanket, settle in, and let's uncover the terrifying truth behind these real-life medical horrors. Number 10. Michael Swango. When medical professionals turn into murderers, their crimes often go unnoticed for long periods, primarily because their victims are already sick and at risk of dying. Michael Swango is a chilling example of such a case. After serving in the U.S. Marine Corps, Swango attended Southern Illinois University School of Medicine and began his medical career. In the early to mid-1980s, while working as a surgical intern at Ohio State University, his colleagues began noticing an alarming trend. Swango's patients were dying at an unusual rate. Despite the suspicions surrounding him, proving patient murders in a medical setting is notoriously difficult, and an investigation into Swango cleared him of any wrongdoing. However, his residency at Ohio State was cut short. Swango moved on to work as an emergency medical technician, where his sinister behavior continued. His co-workers noticed a disturbing pattern. Whenever Swango offered them food or coffee, they would become violently ill. He was arrested and convicted of poisoning his colleagues with arsenic and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. After his release, Swango fell in love with a nurse named Kristen Kinney. However, his murderous tendencies could not be tamed. Kinney, like his colleagues before, began to experience unexplained bouts of severe illness. In reality, Swango was slowly poisoning her, and Kinney, unable to bear the effects, tragically took her own life. Swango, using falsified credentials, returned to work in another hospital, and the deaths continued. A series of events eventually exposed him, prompting an FBI investigation. Fleeing to Zimbabwe, Swango continued his killing spree until he was finally caught and extradited back to the U.S., where he received a life sentence. While the exact number of Swango's victims is still unknown, it's believed he may have murdered as many as 60 people, using arsenic and other poisons to stay under the radar for years. His case is a horrifying reminder of how medical professionals can exploit their positions of trust to commit unspeakable crimes. Number 9. John Christie. John Christie was a notorious English serial killer who posed as a doctor, offering illegal abortion services to prostitutes and vulnerable women in the 1940s and early 1950s. During this time, abortion was illegal in England, which allowed Christie to operate under a dark and deceptive pretense, making his victims believe he could help them. Christie's method of murder was chillingly calculated. Using a mixture of gases meant to mimic anesthesia, he would render his victims unconscious. Once they were defenseless, he strangled them to death. He then hid their bodies in his apartment. Many of them were buried in the crawl space or under the floorboards, eerily reminiscent of later serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Christie's twisted killing spree claimed the lives of at least 6 to 8 people, though some estimates suggest the number may be as high as 10. His own wife, Ethel, became one of his victims when Christie turned on her as well. The most tragic part of his spree involved the Evans family, his neighbors. Christie killed Timothy Evans' wife, Beryl, during a botched abortion and later murdered their infant daughter, Geraldine. To cover his tracks, Christie testified against Timothy Evans, leading to Evans being wrongfully convicted and hanged for the murder of his family. In a grim twist of fate, John Christie's own crimes eventually came to light, unraveling the truth behind his dark deeds. When police finally searched his home, they found the bodies of multiple victims hidden throughout the apartment. Christie was eventually convicted for his murders and was executed by hanging on July 15, 1953. Christie's horrifying actions not only claimed the lives of his direct victims, but also led to the wrongful execution of an innocent man, leaving a tragic legacy of injustice. Number 8. John Bodkin Adams. John Bodkin Adams, a prominent physician, was arrested on October 1, 1956, after police gathered substantial evidence that he was responsible for the deaths of over 100 of his patients. Adams was put on trial in 1957, accused of being a serial killer who took advantage of his position of trust to kill for profit. Adams was not just a murderer, but also a skilled manipulator, politically and socially astute. He borrowed money from patients to buy cars and real estate, and cultivated friendships with influential people, including the local mayor. These connections allowed him to continue his killing spree under the guise of a respectable and well-regarded physician, all while securing passive income from his wealthier patients. His motive was simple: greed. Adams used various methods to kill his patients, typically after persuading them to leave a large portion of their estate to him. For example, he once tried to convince a woman to grant him part of her fortune, shortly after he had failed to save her husband. Adams frequently made house calls, gaining the trust of his patients, only to use his medical expertise to quietly murder them. Adams blurred the lines between euthanasia, murder, and medicine, often presenting his actions as mercy killings or medical treatment. But, in reality, they were cold-blooded murders driven by financial gain. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Adams was acquitted in his 1957 trial, where he faced the potential death penalty. Though he was stripped of his medical license and barred from practicing medicine, Adams lived out the rest of his life in freedom, dying in 1983. John Bodkin Adams remains one of history's most notorious cases of a doctor abusing the trust of his patients for personal gain, leaving a legacy of greed, manipulation, and murder. Number 7. Thomas Neill Cream. Thomas Neill Cream was a classic example of a psychopath hiding behind the respectability of a medical degree. Not only was he a practicing doctor, but Cream also performed illegal abortions and was involved in a host of other criminal activities, including theft, burglary, and arson. But most chilling of all, Cream was a cold-blooded murderer. Operating during the same period as Jack the Ripper, some have speculated that Cream himself might have been the infamous killer. However, many of the Ripper murders occurred while Cream was incarcerated, casting doubt on this theory. What is clear, though, is that Cream had a deadly focus. He targeted women, typically using poison as his method of murder, which differed greatly from the brutal, hands-on nature of the Ripper's killings. Cream's lethal substance of choice was often strychnine, and his poisonings went undetected for a long time. However, after the exhumation of one of his former patients revealed strychnine poisoning, the authorities finally caught up with him. Despite being convicted and sentenced to life in prison, Cream was somehow released early due to good behavior and returned to his murderous ways. Cream's killing spree finally ended with his execution by hanging. His case is a grim reminder of how dangerous and manipulative a killer with medical knowledge can be, and his crimes continue to intrigue historians and true crime enthusiasts alike. Number 6. Kermit Gosnell. The case of Kermit Gosnell stands out on this list, as he was a licensed physician performing legal abortions. Yet his horrific actions took him into the realm of criminality and murder. Gosnell operated an abortion clinic in Philadelphia, but he went far beyond the legal boundaries of medical practice, carrying out illegal late-term abortions and engaging in dangerous experimental procedures. Some of these botched abortions resulted in the deaths of both babies and patients. In 2010, the FBI and Philadelphia police raided Gosnell's clinic, uncovering shocking conditions that were described as filthy, unsanitary, and gruesome. Blood-stained furniture, unsanitary medical equipment, and fetal remains were found scattered throughout the clinic. It became clear that Gosnell had been violating medical and legal standards for years. Gosnell was eventually convicted of killing 3 babies who were born alive during attempted late-term abortions. He would sever the spinal cords of these infants after their births, a horrifying practice he referred to as snipping. In addition to the murders, Gosnell faced numerous other charges, including manslaughter for the death of a patient and various violations of medical protocols. Kermit Gosnell's crimes shocked the nation and drew attention to the dangers of unchecked medical practices. His case was a chilling reminder of what can happen when medical professionals violate their oath to do no harm and instead engage in gross negligence and murder. Number 5. Stephen Massof. Stephen Massof, a medical worker under the notorious abortionist Kermit Gosnell, was deeply involved in the horrific practices at Gosnell's clinic. Massof was just as complicit in the gruesome murders that took place, often handling the most horrifying tasks under Gosnell's direction. His role in the clinic's operations involved terminating live births that resulted from botched abortions, mirroring the horrific actions of his mentor. During his testimony, Massof admitted to witnessing and participating in the killing of over 100 infants by severing their spinal cords, a procedure referred to as snipping. His shocking candor in court provided insight into the horrors that had been unfolding behind the clinic's closed doors, leading to a lighter sentence for his cooperation. However, Massof's crimes were no less heinous. He was an active participant in the murders, making him just as culpable as Gosnell. Despite the appalling nature of his actions, Massof received a comparatively lenient sentence of 6 to 12 years in prison. While he may not have been the mastermind behind the clinic's atrocities, his involvement in the killings cemented his place as one of the many individuals responsible for the tragic deaths that occurred under the guise of medical care. Number 4. Jack Kevorkian. Jack Kevorkian, famously known as Dr. Death, remains one of the most controversial figures in medical history. To some, he was a compassionate humanitarian who provided relief to terminally ill patients suffering unbearable pain. To others, Kevorkian was a dangerous figure who crossed the line between mercy and murder, driven by a macabre fascination with death. Kevorkian's long-standing advocacy for assisted suicide gained national attention in 1990 when he performed his first high-profile assisted death, helping Janet Adkins, who suffered from Alzheimer's, end her life. This act launched him into the media spotlight and thrust the global debate over euthanasia and assisted suicide into the public discourse. At the time, the legal landscape surrounding euthanasia was murky. Kevorkian saw himself as a pioneer fighting against a flawed system, arguing that patients in unbearable pain had the right to choose a dignified death. However, assisted suicide was illegal in most countries, including the U.S., and Kevorkian's actions challenged the medical and legal establishment. Despite this, some countries like the Netherlands began to develop frameworks to allow euthanasia under strict conditions, while the U.S. resisted. Over time, Kevorkian assisted in the deaths of more than 130 patients, sparking heated debates. While his patients often left clear documentation that they wished to end their suffering, Kevorkian's methods, including the use of his homemade Mercitron device, raised ethical and legal concerns. Kevorkian's actions eventually caught up with him. In 1998, he crossed a line that would seal his fate. He recorded the assisted death of Thomas Uke and broadcast it on 60 Minutes. The footage showed Kevorkian administering a lethal injection, going beyond mere assistance and directly ending a life. The video shocked the public, and Kevorkian was charged with second-degree murder. In 1999, Jack Kevorkian was convicted and sentenced to 10 to 25 years in prison for his actions. He served 8 years before being released on parole in 2007 due to his declining health. Jack Kevorkian's legacy is one of intense moral debate where the line between mercy and murder becomes blurred. As we continue down this list, we'll uncover more medical professionals who used their knowledge in far darker and more sinister ways. Number 3. Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman, a British physician who appeared to be a caring and compassionate doctor, committed one of the most horrific killing sprees in medical history. Over the course of his career, Shipman is believed to have killed more than 200 people, making him one of the deadliest serial killers ever recorded. Shipman's patients, many of whom were elderly and vulnerable, died at an alarmingly high rate compared to those of other doctors. Yet most dismiss this as mere coincidence, assuming that Shipman was either caring for particularly severe cases or had simply encountered a run of tragic events. This allowed him to continue his murderous activities for years, with few questions raised about the disturbing number of deaths under his care. The truth was far more sinister. Shipman used diamorphine, a powerful painkiller typically reserved for the most serious medical cases, to kill his patients. He would administer lethal doses intravenously, causing an overdose that appeared to be natural or medically justified. His method was quiet and nonviolent. There were no bloody scenes, just silent deaths. This made it easier for Shipman to continue his killings unnoticed. Despite his growing body count, early investigations into Shipman's conduct uncovered no evidence of wrongdoing, allowing him to carry on his deadly work. By the time he was finally caught in 1998, he had claimed at least 215 lives, although the true number of his victims may be even higher. Shipman was eventually convicted of 15 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Harold Shipman's crimes was his apparent enjoyment of killing those who were weaker and defenseless. His calm demeanor and position of trust allowed him to commit his murders with little suspicion, making him one of the most terrifying medical murderers in history. Harold Shipman's case demonstrates the terrifying power a trusted medical professional can wield. But we're not done yet. More dark stories of doctors turned killers lie ahead. Number 2. Donald Harvey. Donald Harvey, known as the Angel of Death, presented himself as a caring and considerate nurse's assistant working across multiple hospitals. However, beneath his facade of kindness lay a monstrous killer with a deep-seated hatred for the very people he was supposed to care for. Over a span of decades, Harvey used his medical access to commit a horrifying series of murders. Harvey employed a variety of methods to end his victims' lives. He suffocated them with pillows, tampered with catheters, and poisoned them using substances such as cyanide and arsenic. His methods were calculated, often leaving little suspicion that anything other than natural causes had claimed his patients. Harvey's bloodlust was so intense that he would sometimes kill 2 people in a single day. For years, Harvey's killing spree went unnoticed. He exploited his position of trust and the natural vulnerability of hospital patients who were already in poor health to carry out his gruesome acts. By the time he was finally apprehended, he had confessed to committing 87 murders, though many believe the actual number of victims could be much higher. In 1987, Donald Harvey was sentenced to multiple life sentences after confessing to his crimes. His reign of terror ended in a prison cell, where he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in 2017. Harvey's case is a chilling reminder of the lethal power that medical professionals can wield when their oath to heal is replaced by a desire to kill. Donald Harvey's horrifying spree as the Angel of Death shows just how easily a killer can hide in plain sight within the medical field. But we've got one final chilling story to tell. Stay with us as we reveal the most terrifying medical murderer on our list. Number 1. Josef Mengele. Josef Mengele, infamously known as the Angel of Death, stands as one of the most evil figures in history. As a Nazi physician at the Auschwitz concentration camp, Mengele carried out horrifying medical experiments, murders, and torture on innocent victims, especially children. Mengele's experiments and actions were not driven by science, but by cruelty and the twisted ideology of the Nazi regime. Mengele had a particular fondness for experimenting on Jewish children, especially twins. His sadistic experiments involved injecting chemicals into their eyes to try to change their eye color, sewing twins together to create conjoined twins, and performing other horrific procedures without anesthesia. Mengele also engaged in cruel trials aimed at increasing German fertility and sterilizing Jewish victims. Many of his so-called experiments resulted in the prolonged suffering and eventual death of his defenseless victims. In addition to his experiments, Mengele personally selected countless prisoners to be sent to the gas chambers, taking a perverse satisfaction in deciding who lived and who died. He was one of the most recognizable faces of Hitler's final solution, the Nazi campaign to exterminate the Jewish population of Europe. Despite the atrocities he committed, Mengele managed to escape prosecution after World War II. While many high-ranking Nazis were captured and held accountable for their war crimes, Mengele fled to South America, where he lived in hiding for decades. He evaded capture until his death in 1979, living under various aliases in countries like Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. Mengele's name has become synonymous with the horrors of the Holocaust and the depths of human cruelty. His actions serve as a haunting reminder of how medical knowledge, when used without ethics or compassion, can become a tool of unimaginable evil. And that wraps up today's episode. Creepshow fam! These stories are chilling reminders that not everyone in a position of power uses it for good. And even the people we trust the most can hide dark secrets. If you found this video both fascinating and terrifying, hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We've got plenty more disturbing true stories to explore together. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep the lights on. See you in the next video.